Happy Cinco de Mayo. We have free margaritas on the next break. Not really. As I look around this room, I see a lot of things that a famous man has put his hands into at some point in time. His name was Thomas Edison, and I'm sure every one of you have heard of who he is. He had a passion for designing and creating and engineering his thoughts into reality. And what most of you don't know about Thomas Edison, he also had a passion about healthcare and wellness. This was one of his famous quotes about health and wellness, and I'm only going to read half of it. He said, "The doctor of the future will give no medicine." I know you're probably wondering, what future is that? Right? But will instruct his patients in the care of the human frame. This is the human frame. And this is a story about the human frame.
Today, let's do Benjamin Franklin. An investment in knowledge pays the best interest. Okay, listen to your teachers.
Love you.
Love you.
It's a good life. It's a good
life.
Mommy. Mommy. Mommy.
I'm coming.
Mommy, it hurts.
Oh, no, baby. When Anna got sick, I just couldn't understand it. Why was this loving little girl going through this?
I think your daughter is lactose intolerant.
Acid reflux.
Everything looks okay.
Everything's fine.
Everything is not fine. There's something wrong with our little girl.
Mrs. B, you need to calm down.
I'm not leaving this hospital until I know what's wrong with my daughter.
Unfortunately, the tests confirm that she's very ill. There is currently no cure for Anna's condition.
Doctor, please, this is our little girl. I'm scared, Mom. Me too. We're not giving up.
Like a small boat on the ocean.
We need a solution. We need it now.
Big wave
And we'll get it
How?
into motion.
by not losing our faith.
Like how a single
How
word
long you been married? 14 years.
open.
Free her from this.
Might only have one man.
Can you even hear me?
I can make an explosion. This is my fight song. Take back my life.
So you're telling me that when this baby girl fell 30 feet, she hit her head just right, and it didn't kill her, and it didn't paralyze her. It healed her.
Yes.
Well, that's impossible.
This is a little hard to believe. There's a lot of people out there that are just looking for publicity.
A lot of people think we're crazy.
You either roll with it or you get rolled on.
He told me I'd be fine.
I've still got a lot of fire left
Who told you you'd be fine?
in me.
Powerful story made into a movie, true story. And I want to explain the events of what happened here, because it could have happened to any one of you in here. At the beginning of the trailer, you'll notice a little girl was placed inside of a tire. She was put into a mechanical position in which she was almost in the fetal position, which we call flexion in the science of joint biomechanics. She was rolled around and received minute traumas to the frame. She was taken out of the tire, went to school that day, and in the middle of the night, the parents woke up to the screeching sound of a young child in unbearable pain. They rushed to the room, and the first thing you notice about her is her abdomen is distended almost 6 times the normal size. So, of course, they pick her up, they rush her to the hospital, they run through a gamut of tests at the hospital, and they can find nothing wrong with her. And so they're telling the parents, she's okay. We don't see anything wrong. Meanwhile, she's still distended. So they start making a diagnosis. And the diagnosis was acid reflux, or she's lactose intolerant. And I need to explain to you what the word diagnosis means since we were talking about Greek and Latin. The word di means two, and agnos means don't know. So it's two people that don't know. Always take a diagnosis with a grain of salt and laugh just like that, regardless of what it is. So she's getting nowhere at the hospital. They end up taking this little girl home, and her condition is worsening by the hour. And now the mother is starting to get in panic mode. And so she decides to get on the internet. She's looking around. Who is the number one pediatrician in the country? The problem is they're living in Texas, and he's in Boston. So they call up, they try to make the appointment, and can't even get through to the doctor. They can't even get past the scheduling front desk girl. And so it's a big dead end, and it's a hope that's never going to happen. So the mother finally gets distraught and says, I'm going to get on a plane, and I'm going to fly to Boston, and we're going to go into the waiting room, and we're going to stay there until the doctor sees this little girl. So that's just exactly what they did. And so the number one pediatrician in the country could not figure out what was wrong with her. And this is a reality of what's happening about the definition of your health. Your health is defined by two things. You've heard a host of the first part of it, biochemistry. But the other part of your health that you don't hear a whole bunch about is called biomechanics. You're extremely mechanical. And in the engineering field, I worked with some extremely complicated things. Enriched plutonium, we were designing and implementing and programming nuclear weapons for our nation's defense. And it was complicated. But it was nowhere near complicated as this thing that we take for granted right here. So, in time, what happens when we have mechanical traumas? The most mechanical entity in the human body, of course, is the spinal column, which is made up of movable bones. So it is mechanical. And when we talk about the word mechanical, you have to include the word physics. Because in engineering, we know that an engineer is always constantly fighting physics. If we look at how physics is defined, it's either classical mechanics or quantum mechanics. But all definitions of physics are mechanics. And reverse that thought, everything that is mechanical is subjected to physics, just like the law of gravity that's holding you in your seat. So, as we look at this picture, it's a description of the mechanical entity of the spinal column. The picture on the left would be normal biomechanical alignment of the spinal column. When the bones are pushed forward, now notice I said pushed forward, not twisted around. Unique and distinct difference. But when the vertebrae are mechanically positioned forward, then it creates a diameter for those nerves, which are the yellow things there, to branch off of the spinal cord and, of course, gets distributed all over the body. We know the central nervous system controls everything, but it's protected by a mechanical entity that is subjected to physics. In particular, the law, or the second law of thermodynamics, which basically is broken up into two. We know the first one, right? Energy cannot be created or destroyed. But it's the second one, the second law of thermodynamics, talks about this word called entropy. Entropy is the measure of disorder. It's entropy that wears your shoes out. It's entropy that wears your car out. It's entropy that's wearing the stage out. It's entropy that degrades everything as we look around. That is a law of physics. In the engineering, we call it entropy. But in biology, we call it the aging process. And the cool thing about entropy is that it can be speeded up or it can be slowed down. So what do I mean by that? When we put our body in flexion, and has anybody done that today? If you got dressed, you put yourself in flexion. If you got dishes out of the dishwasher, you're in flexion. If you got clothes out of the dryer, you were in flexion. If you leaned over on the toilet, you were in flexion. And the constant putting our body in flexion causes biomechanical changes in the spine in which the vertebra, like the picture on the right, begin to shift backwards. When we go excessive flexion and vertebrae shift backwards, our center of gravity falls forward. And this is why we age. I look at it, and I don't call this the aging process. I say that's excessive entropy. So how do we deal with that? Minimize putting your body mechanically in flexion. And just the opposite of flexion is extension, right? We've already went over a couple of exercises about extension. It's one of the most crucially biomechanical positions that you can put yourself into on a daily basis that will change your health on a level that you've never seen. What happens to those nerves when the bones deviate backwards? You see, those openings are there when the bones are put forward, when your body's in extension. Those holes are minimized when we put our body mechanically in flexion. And when we minimize the opening of those holes, you now have a diagnosis of spinal stenosis. Stenosis is an engineering term. Way before it was brought into medicine and described as arteries stenosing. And now orthopedic guys are using it because it's a cool word. You have spinal stenosis because you're degenerating. You have degenerative disc disease or degenerative joint disease. And to an engineer, that's just as absurd as if I said, your tires on the front of your car are degenerating, you have degenerative tire disease. So what happens, and this is an engineering complex, because we know the nervous system basically is a wiring diagram. It conducts electrical impulses. And none of your organs will function, except the heart for a little while because it has its own electrical system, if you disconnect it from the brain, because it's based and fed and controlled by the nervous system. The problem that we have with this mechanical entity is that it's going to malalign. Every one of you that drove a car here today have the front end out of alignment, whether it's 2% or 98%. Why? And if you take it to Pep Boys and they realign that front end again, guess what it's going to do when you start to drive it out of the parking lot? Come out of alignment again. And then you take it to Pep Boys and they realign it and it comes out, you take it back and the cycle. That's entropy. And that's exactly what happens to the biomechanics of that spinal column, the one that is holding you upright right now. There was a study done in 1921 by the medical community, Dr. Henry Windsor. And he was funded by the University of Pennsylvania. And what he wanted to know was, if I know the known cause of death of an individual, could I do a dissection and find a mechanical misalignment, spinal stenosis, damaging the nerve that went to the organ that caused the cause of death? Pretty straightforward. So, University of Pennsylvania was interested in this. So they allowed him to conduct not only one, not two, but 3 studies, 200 cadavers, and 100% correlation between a bone that it deviated posterior by too much excessive flexion, damaged the nerve, caused the diseased organ that ultimately caused the cause of death. And these are just some of the results. We look at the first one. All 9 cases of spinal misalignment for stomach disease, not half, not most, all of the 200 cadavers that died of a stomach disease had spinal stenosis at T5 through 2 right between the shoulder blades. Why? Because that's the nerves that innervate the stomach. Lung diseases. Everybody in this room has had a family member or a loved one that has been compromised by a lung disease. Not most lung diseases, but 26 cases of lung disease had spinal misalignments in the upper thoracic spine. Mechanical misalignments from past trauma, from excessive flexion. Liver disease, gallstones. We talked about diabetes today. is quickly surpassing the #1 cause of death in the US. Is it possible that we have diabetes figured out wrong? Is it a biochemistry problem or is it a biomechanical problem? You see, when we have a mechanical misalignment in the lower thoracic spines, and it will because it's physics, it damages those nerves that control the output of the pancreas. Insulin production will be off, and now we end up with diabetes. And then all the way down, or second to the bottom, how many of you know somebody, a male, hopefully a male, that has prostate cancer? Is there a connection? This study was remarkable. And then at the very bottom, how many of you have ever looked at your body biomechanically and said, I'm going to prevent heart disease by maintaining good biomechanical alignment? It's almost unheard of, right? You've heard a host of biochemistry advice, but the biomechanics advice is this. It's crucially important to minimize putting your body in flexion. It's crucially important that you maintain your body biomechanically just as you would if I gave you the keys to a Lamborghini, or even better than that. It's crucially important that you have somebody, a good biomechanic, to take care of your spine biomechanically and manage your biochemistry. You see, it's the nervous system that controls and coordinates all organs and structures in the human body. That's Gray's Anatomy. So when we have a mechanical entity that is subjected to the laws of physics, every one of you in this room that drove here with a front end out of alignment also have spinal stenosis. It's just a matter of time before you see the symptoms associated with spinal stenosis, like this little girl in this story. So what happened at the end of the story? Whether you believe it was a miracle, and I absolutely do believe in miracles. And we're going to talk about hope and reality at the very end of this in the close. But the reality is this. She had a trauma being in the flex position. She had a trauma when she fell all the way down 30 feet to the bottom of that tree. And when she came out of the trauma, the second one, her bloating and distension went away. Why? Because miraculously, she landed just right to decompress the nervous system to allow normal physiology to occur in the large intestine. And her bloating went 100% away. And not one doctor on the planet could figure out what was wrong with her. Because nobody's talking biomechanics. And my question is this. When's the last time you had your spine checked biomechanically? Thank you all for coming.